We have a tradition every year at this time to look at this idea of superstition and to recognize that this thing that we do here, this thing that we teach and practice here, is nothing of the sort. So I'm going to get my bad puns out of the way immediately. And first of all, tell you that we're going to get our skeletons out of the closet when it comes to any ideas of superstition surrounding this teaching. And we are also going to reveal that we have nothing up our sleeves. Okay? So you can forgive me, I just had to say that. Anyway, so this year, what we're talking about is spirituality in terms of trick or treat. I love what this holiday has as a history, and I love to look up the meaning of words and play with them and see how they relate and correlate to what we're about. And I enjoy metaphors very much. All of you who know me know that. And so, trick has a definition that I wanted to share initially. As a matter of fact, I don't really need this, but there's some fun synonyms here. We all understand that a trick involves some type of deception. It's some sort of trickery in that we create an illusion or there is involved some sleight of hand. A couple other words for it include scheme, a ploy, a ruse, a setup, a practical joke, a prank, a spoof, a gag, a skillful act, a stunt, etc. Some type of outwitting. And the interesting thing about trick in this terminology is that it involves some necessity to have a superstition. That in this sense, a trick involves the necessity to do something underhanded in order to get the desired outcome. So the old definition of trick means that in order to get our treat, we have to do something funny, something that's not quite above board. And the interesting thing about that, how it correlates to this concept of superstition, is that superstition implies that there is power in something, someone, or a combination thereof outside of us. And what has to accompany that belief is that we don't have that power within us. And so we say, well, whether it's your lucky rabbit's foot or a certain, we make fun of ourselves a great deal, a certain posture or method that we must adopt in order to contact the divine or get our meditation right or do our prayer correctly. All kinds of machinations and methods that we may believe are the only way that we can connect with the infinite and trick it into giving us what we need or desire, as if all of that was required. So part of superstition is that it is a belief in duality. It is a belief in separation. It begins with the idea that the goods, the treats, are out there somewhere, not in here. They're not in us, they're not near us, they're not in our neighborhood. And that the treats are in somebody else's hands and not ours. And so we've got to bend over backwards and do all kinds of funny things to get our share. So this belief is one in limitation. It is one in separation. It is one in lack that requires us to have all kinds of tricky coping mechanisms in order to get our needs met. Now, of course, what we really know up here, and some days we remember it in here and in the activity of our lives, is that we live in an infinite universe. And that power and that presence, those treats, are all within and around us. And what we discover in this teaching is a trick that we can do, a trick that we must know how to do in order to access that. And that is to believe. And would you agree that some days believing is quite a trick? Anybody admit that? Okay. we understand this idea, and we have heard it said. We have read it on paper. We have discussed it in groups and classes. It is done unto you as you believe. And yet, Whether we became acquainted with that because it is a Christian teaching or not, it doesn't matter. I know that we just spoke in the last couple of weeks again that quantum physics tells us also that what we measure for, we get. So no matter what route you took to come upon this idea that it is done unto us as we believe, the trick of believing is a trick in some sense. That's because we get to, in fact, we must let go of the idea of separation. We must release all of our ideas of superstition. We cannot possibly believe that which we cannot see yet and wish to experience is right here. And yet that trick of believing is required for that thing to show up. So we must study how to believe. We must study evidence of the presence of the infinite, although invisible. We must develop a faith in that presence based upon the evidence of its visibility, of its existence. We must somehow come to this place where we can believe that even though we can't see it, it's still here with us. And in fact, it is so close. It is said to be nearer than our breathing. In the Talmud, it says it is closer than our neck vein. So that is how close that which we desire, and today we're calling it our treat, it is for us. And yet our trick is to learn how to believe. Interesting thing about the history of this holiday. I want to pause, though. I want to take a little break and say, yay for Mexico. Did anybody follow that? Oh my goodness. Yes. Beautiful. Yes. And one of the people in leadership was quoted as saying, I know I'm not supposed to say this because this is a spiritual or religious belief and I am in government, but I believe that this was a gift from God. It was the most, the biggest storm in recorded history barreling down on this city, on this area, and nothing happened but a couple scratches. Because there was a willingness to tap in and to believe and to act accordingly, to trust the information that's coming. You know how the natural population, for example, gets that information and they run for the hills. They don't watch the Weather Channel. And if we trust that same knowingness within us, we'll always be in the right place at the right time, too. So I just inserted that into my talk, but that was amazing. So this holiday goes back to the earth-based religions and this idea, actually, that November 1st begins the new year. And that, excuse me, and that there is supposedly an overlap at that time between the worlds of the living and those who have passed. And so young men would dress up in costumes pretending to be those spirits of the dead. And they would go door to door and ask for a treat of some sort and say that it was for those who had passed on. So it was sort of like this, perhaps, a corruption of original idea of honoring the dead that got into this, oh, well, I can go door to door and ask for treats and say I'm going to give them to the spirits, but I'm really just a person dressed up as one. Hard to say. So typically something was performed, a trick was performed in order to get the treat. Perhaps a poem or a song or a magic trick, a sleight of hand or something. And so that this was an exchange. I'll do a trick for you if you'll give me a treat. It evolved. Can you imagine that after the Scotch and the Irish came to the to America, I will say, it became something that started to show up in western part of the continent first, about 1911, I think. And it became something that was more about mischief. There was an evolution or a devolution in the interpretation of this whole thing, which was, if you don't give me a treat, I will play a trick on you, or I will make mischief, or I will make a mess. So that's a little bit, very loosely stated about the history of the holiday. The Christian church came along and thought, well, we need to find a way to redirect this tradition a little bit. I'm not sure which century that was, so we're going to just say that was a long time ago. And came up with All Saints' Day and some Christian interpretations of that holiday, recognizing, though, and there are many, because we've discussed these every year, many around the world that have a Day of the Dead, a recognizing of the souls who have passed on, a beautiful honoring, and lots of tradition around it. So then the going to door became an opportunity to get this beautiful biscuit with a cross on it given to you. And the ones who went to perform, I'm jumping back in time before we go to the mischief, okay, or to offer some gift of entertainment in exchange for the gift, they were called solars. They were called solars. And so they would sing a song and get their treat. Okay? You're going to remember that because in a moment we're going to talk about prayers and treaters. Okay? So remember, solars and trick-or-treaters. So having said that, we have a couple different definitions of treat, absolutely. And the first group of definitions of treats have to do with this idea of something that's sweet. You know, when somebody says, why don't you come to lunch with me, my treat, they are saying that they are going to be the one who foots the bill. They're going to take care of that. So a treat is something wonderful, whatever it might be, that someone else is taking care of the expense of or the effort of. And all you have to do is what? Say yes and thank you. Wow, yes, thank you. I remember my first Science of Mind teacher in North Carolina. She said, it's very simple, really. Just say yes and thank you. Yes and thank you. To life's treats. And we have another definition of treat that is parallel to that which involves medical treatment, for example. And I won't bother reading it. It's just that in that sense, when we start to talk about what we do here, when we use the word treat, we are talking about an application of a mindset, of a particular set of ideas that are utilizing spiritual laws and principles to affect a certain outcome. So we'll just put that over there for a moment. So far, what we've said is that we're looking at spirituality and asking ourselves today, is it trick or is it treat? And then in the traditional sense, we understand that trickery has to do with superstition, a belief in duality and separation, and the need to do some special dance to get your goods. Now, the truth of the matter is that they are already given. And so there's no need to do any tricks to get your gifts of the kingdom per se, other than your capacity to believe. And so we're admitting that it is a trick some days. It takes practice to learn how to believe in what you can't see yet. And yet, that is the trick that is required of us in order to make whatever that is visible. So, we've come that far, and now we're looking at treats. And we're saying that treats are, in this case, the gifts of the kingdom. They are our birthright in capital L life. They are all of the riches of the infinite that we are told are already presented, that are already at our feet. And we say, well, gee, that's really wonderful. And yet I don't feel that I'm experiencing as many of those as I would like to. Now, this teaching sometimes bumps up against this reputation that it caught along the way, that all we do is learn how to manifest things. Well, you know, that's just not so. How many of you have studied these principles and practices and have used them to move through illness, have used them to move through a challenge or a loss in your life, have used them to be courageous enough to make a change in your life, have used them to realize a little bit more of what is possible for you? So that's not trickery or sorcery or magic. It isn't anything that we're superstitious about. Because we really understand that how the creative process works is that we must believe in what we cannot yet see. So we have to stick to having faith and trust in the evidence that suggests that it's there. The evidence of electricity will teach you a lot, right? The evidence of water can make a very big mess. The evidence of gravity will determine whether you're on the floor or in flight or whatever it is. So we have evidence of our belief showing up in our lives. And we do these classes. We have one going on right now on Monday nights called Beyond Limits, where we are looking at the evidence showing up in our lives and learning how to find our way to that end and trace our way back from that end to a better beginning that gives rise to a better result. And so we're doing that. So think about it. We're saying that perhaps if we look at spirituality and we ask ourselves, is it trick or is it treat? Perhaps it's not an either-or question. Perhaps it's not either trick or treat. Ernest Holmes, the founder of this teaching, says the answer to the prayer is within the prayer. And that's a funny play on words, because it's not just that the answer to the prayer is within the prayer as if your words are so beautifully crafted that they superstitiously and magically accomplish something like a spell. Oh no. The answer to the prayer is within the prayer because it is within the one praying. And guess what that answer is? It's belief. It's belief. I'm quite sure, though I don't know the details of it, that everything about magic and alchemy has been oft misunderstood and interpreted in other ways than how it's intended and what it is actually for. And what we are doing right here is a kind of alchemy. It is a kind of magic, and yet it is only a study and a practice and an understanding and an implementation of what we discover, what we come to know about how the creative process works. So it isn't trick or treat, because the answer to the prayer is in the prayer, meaning you and me, as we offer up those words. It is in the belief, which means that we learn how to pray believing, which is something that we specialize in here. We learn how to ask, by whatever means, for what it is that we desire to experience with belief that we will have it. And like I said, there's the trick, because that is not something learned overnight, especially if we have decades of living with doubt and a belief in limitation. We might have to throw a few beliefs out the window first. We might have to throw some superstitions out the window. We might have to train ourselves to stop thinking that he's got it and she's got it and they've got it, but I don't. Whatever it is. Okay? So moving on from there, recognizing that it's not trick or treat, but it's actually trick and treat. That the trick is within the treatment, and the trick is within the treater, and that trick is belief. We recognize that we're a lot like those solars who went door to door looking for their treats. What did they do? They sang a song. They offered a poem. They were called solars. And in singing the song and offering the poem in that certain way, quoting from Wallace Wattles, in that capital C, certain, in that capital W way, they received what they were looking for. So there is a certain way to think into the thinking stuff of the universe. There is a certain way to pray, and yet we said we're not superstitious, so you may either learn that certain way from us or not, but it will involve this one trick. Absolutely. It will involve this one trick, and that is belief. And the beauty of it is that when we practice and when we become more familiar with how this whole thing unfolds, every time we think a thought and feel a feeling and set the creative process in motion and make room with what we think about and what we feel about and focus on and talk about all day long, right? When we make room that way for what we do want, it has to show up in our lives. It must. So there is no trickery, there's no chicanery, there's no conning and conning or scamming going on. It is simply the way things work. And then what we previously might have referred to as magic or miracles becomes commonplace. It becomes the way that we live every day. It becomes how we move through life because we have become familiar with how it moves through us. And so you see that it's not trick or treat. The trick, which is believing, is in the treatment. It is in the treater. It is in the souler. And when we come to the infinite with absolute knowing of all that is possible and our relationship to it, and when we come to the infinite with our willingness to believe that what we dream of and desire of might just have been planted there by God, Spirit, Creator, the Absolute, the Infinite, seeking expression by means of us as one of its creations, then we get our treats. So happy Halloween. There's no need to be superstitious, and have a wonderful holiday. And so it is.